Hello, Harold and Rachel. Good afternoon, Sue. Good afternoon, Sue.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How about you?
I'm fine, thank you.
What's that tag you've got on your?
Oh, it says North Hill Reads. I live at a community called North Hill, and
Oh,
the month of February, we all read the same book and have all kinds of programming about it.
oh boy.
So the book this month is the biography of Frederick Law Olmsted, who's the Central Park guy. And it's been super interesting so far. And I think it's going to continue to be very, very helpful. We're enjoying it, all of us.
So you do like a big book study?
Yes.
Oh,
And we have all kinds of guest speakers tonight. A guy is coming and talking about the emerald necklace in Boston and, that kind of stuff.
yeah. Well, that sounds like a great place to be where you've got all that activity.
Yes, we do have lots of marvelous activity, and I have on my badge, obviously. How's the politics playing in your part of the country?
I'll tell you what. Uh, this may not surprise you, but the Border Patrol people are absolutely ecstatic. Uh, it's finally calmed down. And um, you just have no idea how bad it was. And the poor Border Patrol people, they want to do what they're charged with doing, and they weren't able to do that.
So are lots of people getting deported?
No, they're not coming in.
What happened, John?
I'm sorry. Is this Harold?
Yeah, there's Harold.
Was that Harold that asked a question?
I think so, but it looks like he
Yeah.
might be frozen.
He's probably eating dinner.
No, he's frozen, I think.
How are you, Fred?
Good.
In my video is in my videos
I think Harold's got
Real
an audio problem.
slow.
Yeah, he's got some internet problems.
Yeah.
He's the one guy that shouldn't have problems.
That's right.
No,
Fred, I
Yeah.
will not. Where'd Fred go? Fred, I will not be
I'm here.
next week. I have a dinner that I must attend, actually, with the author of the book I was just discussing with
Oh,
John.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
author is coming from New York to meet with us.
That's
Mm,
excellent.
That sounds
Great.
great.
So
yeah.
there's a dinner with him next Tuesday, and I know you would not want me to miss it.
No, actually, I would not. No. That trumps this class.
Yeah, and then I have a question for you. How can Passover be on Saturday night? How can you get ready on Shabbos for Seder?
Good question. I mean, I can't really, yeah, actually, it has. I have been to a couple of Seders that were on
Yeah.
Saturday night. But again, they were Seders. They were not Orthodox, so they went ahead and cooked on Saturday anyway.
Oh, okay.
In the Orthodox world, you basically have to prepare it, on Friday afternoon, and just keep it warm, until then. Yeah.
Yeah, I had Orthodox friends when I was in high school, and their stoves had like a well that
Yeah.
you could heat up and put the stuff in and put the cap on, and then it was still warm.
Right.
Saturday night.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I think everybody's coming who's coming would start. This is one of the big parshas. Now, some people would argue this may be the most important parsha in the Torah. This is the Ten Commandments. And it's a really long one. So I thought what we would do is rather than read the whole thing, which really could take forever, we just do the part that we'll read Saturday morning, which is the third part of the parsha. And that begins on chapter 19
Of Exodus.
in Exodus. Yeah, chapter 19 of Exodus. And the first part is just the first 6 verses, one through 6. So if someone would like to read that.
I can. On the
Okay.
third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God, called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and declare to the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine. But you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel.
There's one very interesting thing that sticks out right at the beginning, of what you read. It says the third new moon, the third month after they came out of Egypt. And here they're getting ready to receive the Torah. But yet, in our tradition, when do we say the Torah was given? On Shavuot. We celebrate the giving of the Torah on Shavuot, which is 50 days after Passover, after the Exodus from Egypt. So the numbers don't really add up. Um, and the rabbis, I think, decided to assign the giving of the Torah to Shavuot because they needed a purpose for the holiday. Because you think of Shavuot, which really just means weeks in Hebrew, the commandment is start on the first day of Passover, count 7 weeks, and the next day, the 50th day, is a holiday, which, doesn't seem to make any sense. Why should that be a holiday just because it's 50 days after Passover? What is it celebrating? What is it marking? And so the rabbis decided they needed to give it a purpose. And so they went ahead and said that's when the Torah is given. Although clearly that's not when the Torah was given, according to the text here. It's interesting. Later on, the church took the same holiday and just reworked it. Called it Pentecost. From the Greek for 50. And this is when Jesus is said to have returned and talked to his disciples in an upper room. So they reworked it themselves. Actually, they're both really harvest festivals. Uh, Passover occurs when you're harvesting the barley. And Shavuot occurs when you're harvesting the winter wheat crop. And that's why we count the omer between Passover and Shavuot, because you had to bring an omer of barley to the temple as an offering after the barley harvest, which occurred around the time of Passover. There's an interesting theory that the Torah was actually given on what we would call now a Rosh Hashanah, because if you look at the commandment in the Torah for Rosh Hashanah, which is a term the Torah doesn't use. All it says is on the first day of the seventh month, which is a weird time to have a New Year's, but on the first day to have a seventh month will be a holy day. You will do no work. And the only characteristics that it gives for that holiday is it is a Yom Teruah, a day of shofar blowing, and a Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. But it doesn't tell you what you're supposed to be remembering. Just that's the whole thing that the Torah gives you. And some of the rabbis reasoned, when did we first hear the shofar blown? Well, as we're going to read a little bit further on, it was while the Torah was being given at Mount Sinai. You heard the sound of the shofar getting louder and louder with all the thunder and lightning and whatnot going on. And so and that what we should be remembering probably is the giving of the Torah. So you can make a fairly decent case that what we're calling the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, was really when we should celebrate the giving of the Torah. but then that would mess up Shavuot again because it wouldn't have any reason. So so what we have. The rabbis sort of shuffled things around and gave us what we have now. Um, the other interesting thing is that phrase on eagle's wings. They carried you on eagle's wings. In 1949, after the modern state of Israel uh, was established, Jews from all the Arab countries surrounding there were driven out and ended up coming to Israel because the Yemenite Jews couldn't come on their own to Israel. And so Israel organized a series of airlifts. It was called Operation Magic Carpet to bring the Yemenite Jews to Israel in 1949. And one of the Yemenite Jews, they're a very religious group of Jews, described it. This was the fulfillment of the Torah's phrase on the wings of eagles. Because, these people in Yemen were basically living in the Middle Ages. None of them had ever seen a light bulb or driven in a car or listened or watched the television. They were living in the 12th century for all practical purposes. And here they were being flown in an airplane to Israel. And to them, that really was on eagle's wings, essentially. And then the interesting response of the people, there's a little short segment, which is verses 7 through 9. Someone wants to read that.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord hath commanded him. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever.
Yeah, it's kind of
When
interesting.
Moses told the
Yeah,
words of
yeah,
the people to the Lord.
yeah. So Moses is doing what we would call shuttle diplomacy. Apparently, he's running up and down the mountain. If you really read the story in detail, he appears to be going up and down the mountain 3 or 4 times before this
Yeah.
is all over. Running back and forth. But the interesting thing is that people said, all the Lord has spoken, we will do. Well, when you think about it, the Lord has not given them any commandments so far. I
No.
mean, they're kind of signing a contract they haven't read yet. Really. You
It's
know,
like they're preparing how they're going to deliver the message.
yeah. Well, the only commandment which God gives anybody prior to this is when he tells Abraham, you will circumcise yourself and and
Mhm.
all your family. That circumcision is the only commandment that God gives right up until this time. And to me, when I read this, it's kind of like, if you're signing on to something, on your computer, signing up for some service or something, you always have to check this box. I have read the terms and conditions, of this. And if you actually try to read it, you have to scroll down through 15 paragraphs, of all this dense legal jargon. Nobody does it. After you scroll down through a few paragraphs, you give up and you go back and you check the box. That I've read this and agree to the conditions, which is kind of what the Israelites are doing. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, they haven't been given the Torah yet. There are no commandments. And they said and apparently they're saying that's okay, we'll do it. They're actually signing a contract without really reading it in a way. If you look at it that way.
Brad, I have a question about the dates.
Yeah.
Um, the reference here is on the third new moon. Well, the third new moon we know is roughly 30 days, depending on in 30
No, the
days,
third
2
month, that's
hours,
90 days.
90 days.
That's
I'm sorry.
90
Yeah.
days. Yeah.
The third new moon, a new moon occurs every 30 some days. So
Right.
it'd be
Right.
90 days.
Hmm.
And at that point in time, there wasn't a calendar like we think of a calendar.
Yeah. Well, it was a
Guessing
lunar
time was
calendar. Yeah.
measured by new moons
Yeah.
and all of that. So it'd be 90 days. At what point did all these dates get established, or did they get established over different periods of time? And then
Hmm.
now, for the last 500 years, they've been kind of cemented.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting, the calendar apparently was always a lunar calendar. That it
Yes,
still is. In fact, it still is a lunar calendar that we use as our religious calendar, even to this day. The only
sure.
thing that's really interesting is when it gives the instructions for Shavuot, because it says count 7 sevens, 7 weeks, and I'm not aware of the week being mentioned in any kind of ancient literature anywhere else. I think they kind of invented the concept of a week, because every other measure of time we have is based on astronomical phenomena. The year is the period of our orbit around the sun. The month is the period of the moon's orbit around the earth. You've got the day, which is the period of the earth's rotation on its axis. And then you've got the hour and minutes and seconds, which are just
Well,
divisions of the earth's rotation. But the week doesn't correspond to anything. There's
No,
no
well,
there's no scientific phenomenon that corresponds to the week. That's purely man-made. And the first time I think it's mentioned really is when the Bible talks about Shavuot. Count 7 weeks, 7 sevens, and then you have your next holiday. It's the first time somebody's mentioned a week. And in the creation story, it's a 7 day thing, 6 days of work and a day of rest. But the Jews, as far as I can tell, invented the week, the whole concept of a week.
Huh.
but that parallels very strongly with the 6 days of work and 1 day of rest.
Yeah, yeah.
And
The
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 lunar
only
cycle really isn't a true 30 days. It's like 28 days.
29. It's
Yeah.
it's basically 28 and a half days. It almost
So if
fits
they
the calendar.
counted
Yeah,
the sunrises and sunsets between each
yeah,
full moon,
yeah.
yeah.
But then it just kind of got enshrined in all sorts of different cultures. It's interesting. There was one exception, one time when people tried to change the definition of the week, and that was during the time of the French Revolution. Some of the real radicals they really loved the decimal system. They wanted to run everything on the decimal system. So they tried to divide the month up into 3 10-day weeks to make up a month. And it didn't work. After a few months, they gave it up because nobody would do it. The 7 day week was just too entrenched, in culture to do it. But and then the next section goes into the preparation for going up there, and this is basically verses 10 through 25. That's leading up to the giving of the commandments. Somebody want to read 10 through 25?
I'll give it a try since
Okay.
I'm on the other computer, which seems to be working through the internet. Blessed be Adonai, Jethro said, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people
No, no,
from
no.
the.
Wait, you're in the wrong chapter.
Oh, are we not in Exodus 18?
Exodus 19.
Sorry. I'll get there.
Okay. 19,
Uh,
10 through 25.
right. Got you. Okay. Oh, mine doesn't. And Adonai said to Moses, go to the people and warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day Adonai will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. You shall set bounds for the people round about, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death, without being touched by being either stoned or shot, beast or person. A trespasser shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day, the men among you should not go near a woman. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Adonai came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Adonai said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people not to break through to Adonai to gaze, lest many of them perish." The priests also who come near Adonai must stay pure, lest Adonai break out against them. But Moses said to Adonai, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds upon the mountain and sanctify it.'" So Adonai said to him, "Go down and come back together with Aaron, but not let the priest or the people break through to come up to Adonai, lest God break out against them." And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them.
Yeah. So, but again, you have Moses making another trip up and down the mountain. He goes up to see God, and God says, "Go back down and warn the people again." It's kind of an aerobic thing for Moses. We don't know how tall Mount Sinai is, but he does a lot of going back and forth on the top of the mountain and back
Even a
down again.
hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And think of all the time it takes to do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And then it's in chapter 20. This is where we start the Ten Commandments. This is sort of the peak reading of the Parsha. And actually, we call it the Ten Commandments, but the actual Hebrew is Aseret Debarot, which really means the 10 sayings or the 10 utterances. Or davar can mean a thing also. You could actually translate it as the 10 things or the 10 items. It doesn't really mean commandments. Um, and then it starts off, I'll read them. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods beside me, which, if you think about it, suggests that there are other gods. I think we're still in a time when the Jews have their one God, but he's not necessarily a universal God. He still has to show that he's stronger than the other gods, like he did with Pharaoh in Egypt. So you have monotheism here, but it's not necessarily universal monotheism. It's not clear from this. Um, and then he goes on with the second commandment, um, saying, "You shall not make unto you a graven image, or any manner of likeness, or anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. And you shall not bow down unto them nor serve them. For I am the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the children upon the third of the fathers, upon the third and fourth generation of them that unto the children, unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto the thousandth generation of them that love me and keep my commandments." And there's a lot of stuff in this second commandment. Um, First of all, God breaks his own commandment a couple of times later on in the Torah. Later on in Exodus, when he gives instructions for making the tabernacle in the desert, he says, "Carve two cherubim and put them on top of the ark, with facing each other with their wings outspread and wingtip to wingtip." So that's number one. Number two, in the book of Numbers, when the Israelites have been sinning again, and God sends this plague of fiery serpents to bite them, he tells Moses, "Carve out a brass serpent and put it on top of a pole. And everyone who's been bitten by a serpent can look at it, will be healed." So there's at least two instances where God sort of sets his own commandment aside and commands Moses to make an image of something. Um, but the other question that really comes up with that is, why can't you make carved statues or paint pictures if you're not going to worship them? To me, a plain reading of a text would be, you don't make these things because you can't worship them as idol. Well, the problem is that the later rabbis decided to me, to overinterpret the whole thing and say that all art is forbidden. And that's really why, up until really the 19th century, there's really almost no Jewish art. There are no great Jewish painters and no great Jewish sculptors. They took this to mean that there'll be no art at all, whether or not you're making something to worship or not. Although apparently there were some rebels against that. Archaeologists in Israel have actually found ruins of old synagogues dating back from around the third and fourth century with mosaics in them, with figures of animals and people. So there were some people that decided to defy that, and go ahead and create art. Uh, and other religions have interpreted differently. The Muslims, are, if anything, are probably more strict than the Jews about it. They've forbidden any art, and even in the modern era, you don't see Muslim painters or sculptors. And if you go into a mosque, it's just a bare whitewashed room, or if there's any decoration, it'll just be abstract geometric patterns. So they really are much more exact about that than the Jews are. And then the Christians split on it. If you go into a Catholic church, there's statues of Jesus and Mary, and usually some of the apostles and saints. And the Protestants decided to be strict second commandment people. The typical Protestant church is not going to have any kind of pictures or statues in it. In fact, during the wars of religion that followed the European Reformation, the Protestants used to accuse the Catholics of being idolaters, because of all the stuff they had in their churches. And in the Greek Orthodox churches, you have the icons, and in their tradition, being an icon painter would be like being a Torah scribe. In the Jewish tradition, it's really a holy vocation, making the icons to be used during the services. So there's a number of different ways you can interpret the second commandment, and probably the Jews went overboard on it for a long time up until the modern period. And then going on to the third commandment, which is you shall not take up the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. But what does it mean to take the Lord's name in vain? They're not really talking about lying or perjury, because the ninth commandment, covers that. What they appear to be saying is that the very name of God is sacred, and it can only be used in prayer or study. So, of course, it applies to profanity. You should not use expressions like "God damn it," something like that. But again, the Orthodox Jews have taken that to the extreme. For instance, if you're looking at an Orthodox translation of the Torah, like say the Art Scroll Torah, instead of Adonai, usually you'll see Hashem, the name. They won't even mention God's name even in the translation, where they just use Hashem. So, and basically there is an entire section of the Talmud that deals with taking oath. So if you're a rabbi, a member of a rabbinic court, you're supposed to do everything you can to decide the case without swearing anybody in. Because even if you're telling the truth, you don't really want to use God's name in any kind of context if it's not absolutely necessary. So you try to, even though the witness is telling the truth, still you want to avoid that if you can. And and if you look at the way we do it in a modern courtroom, it's very routine. You have witnesses get up and they put their left hand on the Bible and raise their right hand and say, "I swear that my testimony will be true, so help me God." And you can imagine a reaction in a modern courtroom if a judge were to look over and say, "By the way, do you believe in God? Or does that black book you're resting your left hand on have any particular significance for you?" And so what we've done really, even though, we use Bibles and mention God's name, it's not really a religious ceremony. It's just a legal formula, that you recite, regardless of, whether you believe in God or not, you recite that formula. And so, it just defines perjury essentially. If you lie before you recite it, that's bad, but not necessarily illegal. If you lie after you recite that, then you're open to a charge of perjury. So we've really taken all the context out of it, in modern practice. Um, and then we get to one of the big ones, which is the fourth commandment, which is the Sabbath commandment. And here it is: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any manner of work, you or your son or your daughter or your manservant or your maidservant or your cattle or the stranger that is within thy gate. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, this is a commandment, as you probably know, the Ten Commandments are repeated again in Deuteronomy, and they're almost exactly the same, except for this commandment. There's a number of differences in the Sabbath commandment between Exodus and Deuteronomy. For instance, this commandment in Exodus starts off with remember, Zachor. The one in Deuteronomy starts off with observe or keep, which is Shamor, keep the Sabbath day. And there was a group of mystics in Safat in northern Israel during the 15th century. There were a bunch of Sephardic Jews who had been kicked out in 1492 and ended up in Palestine at Safat. And they wrote a number of the hymns that we sing on the Sabbath. And one of them is called the Lakado D, which is a welcome to the Sabbath bride. And the very first verse says, Shamor v'zachor dibur echad, keep and remember one utterance. They were Kabbalistic mystics, and they really believed that God said both words at the same time. And for some reason, people were able to hear both of them, even though they were both spoken at the same time. Um, it's kind of interesting. It's the only ritual commandment that's part of the Ten Commandments. No other holiday or ritual commandment is included in the Ten Commandments, with this exception. And it's the only ritual commandment that you actually have a death penalty for breaking. It's actually a capital crime in the Torah. In Leviticus, it says, he who profanes the Sabbath will surely be put to death. And apparently they meant it, because you have this episode in the book of Numbers where they catch some guy gathering firewood on the Sabbath, and they bring him to Moses and say, what do you want to do with him? And Moses kicks it upstairs to God, and God says, yeah, I meant what I said. They take him out and stone him. And that was a real problem for the rabbis, because, we really made breaking the Sabbath a capital offense. There might be 100 Jews left in the world today. So the rabbis had to find some way to work around it. And there's all sort of legal, they said if you're doing something you shouldn't do on the Sabbath, two witnesses had to inform you that it was illegal before you did it. And then another two witnesses actually have to see you do it. And they put so many legal roadblocks to make sure that nobody would ever actually be executed for that. But legally, it is a capital crime, to desecrate the Sabbath. The other interesting thing is that the word for work is not the ordinary Hebrew word for work. There's about 2 or 3 Hebrew words for work in the Bible. This one is malacha, which is only used in connection with the Sabbath and holidays. So it's a very special definition of work. And it really includes things that we wouldn't ordinarily call work, things that require no physical exertion at all. So, for instance, driving your car, watching television, getting on the internet, counting money, writing, all these things are considered work in the sense of the Sabbath, which really are not work in the usual sense of the word. There's actually a whole tractate of the Talmud that does nothing but discuss what counts as work and what doesn't on the Sabbath. There are actually 39 characteristics of 39 different categories of work that they go through. And the rabbinic interpretation is that, if you go back to the origin of the Sabbath, that God created things and worked for 6 days and then rested. So the Sabbath is really supposed to be a day when we really get free of everything that man has created. The idea is that you can really admire and respect all the things which man has created, but you can't worship it. On that day, you've got to put it aside, even symbolically. So you don't listen to the radio or get on the internet or watch television. These are all human achievements of human technology, and you do without them for that day. For instance, you could move your furniture in your house on the Sabbath, and that's not considered work, even though
Hmm.
physical exertion's involved. But you could be lying on your couch on Saturday afternoon and going over in your mind what you're going to do when you get back to the office on Monday morning, and that would be considered malaka. That would be considered work. So it's a very special concept of work, that you have during the Sabbath, and which led to a custom in Europe, which has been going on for centuries. They call the Sabbath goy or the Shabbos goy, and this is a non-Jew that you hire to do things on the Sabbath for you that you're not permitted to do yourself. And a lot of rabbis really were very down on that. They said, if you read the commandment, your maidservant and your manservant and even your animals have to rest on that day. So how can you ask anybody else to do anything on the Sabbath day? But then there was another group of rabbis that said, well, the Sabbath is only for the Jews, though. It's not commanded for anyone else. So no one else is breaking God. No one else outside of the Jewish people would be breaking God's commandment if he did this on the Sabbath. Therefore, it's okay, for them to do it because this is basically only commanded on Jews. Okay.
Fred,
Yeah.
the inclusion of your livestock,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is that how is that interpreted? I mean, livestock's going to eat, they're going to roam around, they're going to do whatever livestock does.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. Because, to work them, you'd have to plow with your oxen, or you would have, you'd have to make them do work.
Okay, so
But in order,
okay,
yeah, but if you plowed with your oxen, you're also plowing. Even though the
yes,
oxen are pulling
yeah,
the plow, you're working too. So
yeah.
almost anything you made your animals work, that involves you anyway. You're right. So it's really an
I was
extension of
thinking
God
like the
working.
typical
Unless you
farm.
had a really smart ox that just had AI plowed the field itself.
Yeah,
Well, let's say that you had an ox hooked up to a millstone, walking around and grinding grain.
yeah.
The ox could do that by itself without you being there. So that might be that kind of example of the ox working and you not. But again, it applies to everyone within your family. And again, your animals are kind of considered an extension of your family, for that purpose. But this was really a radical concept in the ancient world because the only days of rest that anybody else got in those days, the king might proclaim a special day, when he ascended the throne or when his first child was born, or if he was victorious in battle, he might give everybody a special day. But there were no routine days off, and essentially, it was a world where you basically got up every morning at dawn, did hard physical work in the field till it was dark, and you basically did that every day in your life till you were too old or sick to do it anymore. And so the Sabbath was really a radical kind of thing. In fact, some of the Roman writers, use that as an accusation against the Jews. That they were undermining the economy, by wasting one day out of every week. You know, Basically that's like 12% of the time you could spend working, and so you're losing 10% of productivity by taking that day off. But even more than monotheism, you could actually make an argument that the Sabbath is really the most unique Jewish contribution to civilization. There's no record of anything like it in any other culture in the ancient world.
But isn't today
And
pretty much worldwide people recognize the Sabbath or Sunday as being a day
it
of rest?
does. Well, certainly Christianity and Islam have taken up the concept too. In Christians it's Sunday, and in Islam it's Friday. I'm not sure about the Eastern religions. I don't know if Hinduism or Buddhism or have rest days or not. I just don't know the religion well enough.
I was going
But
to
and
say
certainly, yeah,
that that I thought when I was in Japan, Sunday was kind of a non-work day.
yeah. I think basically even in a secular society, just for people's physical and mental health, you'd probably have a regular day off, whether it was the seventh day or whatever
Yeah.
thing you wanted to designate. So I think you could make a case for the Sabbath just on a secular basis, just as necessary for people's health not to be working continuously, 7 days a week. And then going on to the fifth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And it's kind of interesting, in the word that Hebrew uses for honor is kavod, which actually means to be heavy. Uh, and basically, if you think about it, it corresponds in English like we say, this is a heavy matter, or his words carry a lot of weight around here. It's sort of the same idea. And so if you translated that commandment literally, it would be give weight to your mother and father. And if your kids were teenagers, nothing you say makes any sense to them. They know that you don't know anything.
They know better.
Exactly. They know
John,
better than you know about everything. You're totally out of it. Your generation doesn't understand the world anymore.
Paul probably worshipped every word John said.
Yeah. And Mark Twain wrote something about that once. He said, when I was a child and a very young man, I really marveled about how ignorant my father was. And later on, when I was in my 30s, I realized that the old man had learned something over the years.
I just read something
Or
like
or
that the
like
other
when
day.
your kids get older and all of a sudden they sound like you.
Exactly.
Ain't
Well,
that the
that ad they
truth?
have now, I forget what insurance company has it. We can't keep you from becoming like your parents.
Progressive.
Progressive, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then on the sixth commandment, which actually is often mistranslated, it's actually thou shalt not murder. And a lot of English translations will say you shall not kill, which actually is not what the commandment means, because obviously there is authorized killing in the Torah. The Torah authorizes capital punishment for certain offenses. God tells the Israelites to go to war on various occasions when they need to. So it really is not a blanket prohibition on killing. Basically, in fact, the word used here is not the usual word for killing. There's a couple of other words for killing someone. This one specifically means murder, which is unauthorized killing. Although a lot of people, though, do interpret the Bible as "thou shalt not kill," and if you really followed that, then you would be a conscientious objector. You'd refuse to fight in war. You'd be opposed to capital punishment. You would really be against any kind of killing for any reason whatsoever. And I know some Christians who interpret it that way. As thou
Puritans.
shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They got exemption from the draft.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a subgroup of Hindus, I think, called the Jains, and they actually extend it to the animal world.
Hmm.
They're vegetarians. They will not kill animals to eat them. They will not even swat flies or crush bugs. They believe that all life is sacred, and you shall not kill extends to everything. And then 8, thou shalt not commit adultery. And 7, rather, you shall not commit adultery. And 8, you shall not steal, which are fairly straightforward. There's not much interpretation there. And then the ninth is you shall not bear false witness. So this is the one against perjury. It differentiates it from the third commandment, which says not to take God's name in vain. So they're two different concepts there. And then the last one got a lot of rabbinic commentary. You shall not covet. But covet is kind of a mental thing. All the other commandments are you shall do this, or you shall not do that. But coveting really is not doing anything. And you can make a case, what's wrong with coveting if you don't do anything about it? Let's say you think your neighbor's wife is really hot, but you respect your neighbor and you don't come on to her. Or you'd really like your neighbor's house, but you make him an offer for it and he refuses it, and that's it. So the rabbis actually said this comes under a category of things called making a fence around the Torah. And making a fence around the Torah means putting rules in place that keep you at a distance from doing anything. In other words, if you don't covet these things in the first place, you won't be tempted to get them. And in the process of getting them, you might have to lie, to steal, to commit adultery, and to kill in order to get your neighbor's house or his wife or his manservant or his animals or whatever. So not coveting them really keeps you from committing all these sins. It's a fence around some of the other commandments. It's not really a sin in itself to covet. And you notice all the things which it gives as examples are your neighbor's house, his wife, his manservant and maidservant, and his animal. These are all physical things that you could possibly get. And in getting them, you might commit a whole bunch of sins, break a lot of the other commandments. But what if you covet your neighbor's athletic ability? What if you covet his intellect? What if you covet his musical talent? These are all things that you really can't take from him. But coveting them might actually be a good thing. You might be inspired to work harder yourself to be more like him. So, you can argue that there's good coveting and bad coveting.
Well,
Coveting and
Fred, this is not an action per se, but more of a mental thought?
yeah, it's wanting to get these things really
Yeah,
bad. It's
that's
really
what I mean.
wanting to,
It's the thought
yeah,
process. It's not the
yeah.
act. It's the
Right.
thought
The
process.
Hebrew word that's used really means desire. You shall not
Yes.
desire these things. And again, you can't really control your thoughts. You can't keep
No.
yourself from wanting something. You obviously can keep yourself from doing something about it.
But the list does, whether it was a sign of the times or not, as you bring up, there are physical things you shall not covet.
Yeah, because these are things
So
that you could get.
capabilities, like you said, their smartness, their ability to hunt or whatever, things you can't take from another
Yeah,
person isn't within that list.
yeah.
It it kind of sounds like and use modern terminology, give your neighbors is their space, allow them their space. Don't
It's that also. Yeah. Again. And again, I think the rabbis were practical people that would realize that you can't control your thoughts. I mean, if you want something, you obviously want it. You can't make yourself not want it in a sense. Although actually, there are other religions that really strive to do that. If you read what the Buddhists believe, they believe that all the trouble and pain and evil in the world is caused by wanting things. We're always wanting more. We're always wanting things we can't have. And the idea is to get yourself into a state where you no longer want anything, what they call nirvana, essentially. Where you have banished all desire, all for anything, and then finally you're free, of any kind of pain or but to me, that's never been very appealing.
Yeah.
I mean, just to put yourself in a state where you don't desire anything or want to do anything. But to them, that's the only way really to live a life totally free of pain.
So the expression from the 50s of keeping up with the Joneses, wouldn't that that's kind of
Well,
borderline.
some people would make a case that our whole modern economy is based on coveting.
Yeah,
You always have to have
that's,
more. You've
yeah,
got to have if your neighbor has a bigger house, well, you better put an addition on your house.
yeah.
If your neighbor just got a new car and yours is 10 years old, you
You
probably
better
need
get
a
a
new
new
car.
car.
Yeah.
Get a
You
red
could
one.
argue if everybody really obeyed the 10th commandment strictly, the economy would collapse.
I don't know. I covet my neighbor's vehicles, but I still drive my 30-year-old vehicles.
Right.
So
Okay. Okay. And then the Parsha ends here with sort of the follow-up on the Ten Commandments. And that starts really on verse 15 and goes through really through verse, let's see. It's really verses 15 through 19 that really wraps up the whole story. Somebody want to read that?
Sure. All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey, but let not God speak to us, lest we die. Moses answered the people, Be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of God may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray. So the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. God said to Moses, Thus shall you say to the Israelites, You yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens. With me, therefore, you shall not make any gods of silver, nor shall you make for yourselves any gods of gold. Make for me an altar of earth. Sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned. I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it out of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. Do not ascend my altars by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it.
So they end up really by some extraneous things that don't really belong to the Ten Commandments. But the Torah does that. They just shuffle things together like that. So basically, it says God says you have seen me talking with Moses. Well, actually, they haven't. They just see Moses going up into this big dark cloud, essentially, and with lightning and thunder and the sound of the shofar going on, so that they don't see it directly. Um, the little thing that they tack on in the end about building an altar says, "If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not make it of hewn stones. For if you lift up your tool upon it," and actually the word they use for tool is terev, which also means sword. And the rabbis interpreted this as you can't use any metal tool on that because metal is used for making weapons of war. Therefore, so you really um, have to try to make it out of stone which has not been shaped into blocks that fit together. And actually, you can do that. If you've ever traveled in New England, you go to Connecticut and New Hampshire, and you see these old farmhouses, and these people have built these stone fences around them. Well, without any mortar or concrete or anything, they just take stones and fit them together, and you can make a fairly stable, fence out of that. Although there's a legend in the Talmud that when Solomon had to build his temple, he was forbidden to use any kind of metal, to work the blocks, to smooth them out. And so God created a magic worm called the shamir. And apparently this is a worm that could eat through stone. And so what you basically do is put the shamir on this chunk of stone, and it smooths it out. It makes it to whatever dimensions you want, and then you can put the block in place, which is kind of nice. You'd have no construction noise going on while the temple's being built. The worm just works quietly on it.
They must have seen Star Wars and saw the laser.
Yeah.
The same kind of principle. Yeah. Okay. So anybody, we have somebody new with us, I think, that Secret Greenfield. Who is Secret Greenfield?
Secret, she's been coming to Saturday morning services.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Secret
Does
Greenfield.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, my microphone doesn't work too well, but yeah, hello. I've been attending on Saturdays and I decided to check out the Torah study today.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome. Yeah. Okay, so next week the portion we read is called Mishpatim, which is a word for laws, and this is basically the fine print. Moses first. You start off with the Ten Commandments, giving 10 very broad statements. The major moral guidelines, but then you get down to the nitty gritty, the real fine print about the specific laws, and this is what we get into next. That starts with verse. With chapter 21. So we'll be starting with chapter 21 next week and starting off with the specific laws that are given in the Torah, which continue for quite a while, actually. And so see you guys next week.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Fred.
thank
That
you.
was
Thank you,
excellent.
Fred.
See you
Yeah.
all
Thank
next
you.
week.
Bye.
See
Bye.
you Saturday.